Good morning, everyone. Today is a little bit of a different topic. We're going to be talking about um, the gas leak that's happening in the Garden Grove area, or the Garden Grove city, and nearby cities. So this includes cities such as Anaheim as well. So it's kind of close to Disneyland. And so far, 50,000 residents have been evacuated from the zone just due to the blast radius if it were to explode. The tanks that are holding this methacrylate. Um, so I want to talk a little bit first about the chemistry of what's the danger of this. And in order to do that, we need to know a little bit about the chemistry. I do have a background in chemistry, so I've taken chemistry, organic chemistry. That was a little bit of my major, more so pharmaceuticals. I'm not necessarily I'm not an expert in it, but I do know enough to be able to understand the situation uh, at a high level. Maybe not the specific details about what's going on the site, but more or less I can kind of understand what the danger is. So that's the first thing we're going to discuss. The next thing we're going to discuss are the risks if it does blow up. What are some things what are some potential dangers? And the third part is we're going to look at it from KTLA 5's news reporting, and then the particular company that's responsible for this issue. And then the last topic is we're going to talk about how this happens in general, and how this relates a little bit to AI and how it's done. The way it's being implemented is done poorly, but this reflects how these accidents also happen. Um, some would call it accidents, others would call it negligence that's causing this. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and get started on the topics. First thing we want to talk about is the chemistry. So on the screen, you can see that this is methyl methacrylate. It's a monomer that's responsible for polymerization to build plastics. So a monomer is a single unit. A polymer is multiple units. You could think of it as Legos. So if you have one Lego, that's a monomer. Let's say if you were to chain those Legos up into different shapes, but let's just say into a straight line, that would be considered the polymer. So polymerization would be kind of chaining those up together. As you chain those up, what happens is it is in a more stable configuration. So it kind of likes being chained up, these monomers, and when it does so, it releases energy. So because it's releasing energy, that's called exothermic. So it produces heat. So as it's building up the chain, it gets a little bit hotter. And you can imagine if you're building up really, really long chains, or you have thousands upon thousands of gallons of this material or reagent, then it's going to produce a lot of extra heat. Now, the thing about this reaction is that as it gets heated, it actually increases the rate at which it reacts. So that's a little bit of a problem, because when it reacts, it produces heat, and that heat ends up, how should I say, it's not necessarily a catalyst, but it ends up increasing the rate of the reaction. So it happens more and more, and you get what's called a runaway reaction. So that's what we looked at here. There's, I know there's some chemists probably watching me thinking like, "Wow, this guy is not as technical as I would hope," because obviously they studied or majored in chemistry or have more experience with it. But at a high level, that's really what's going on. The runaway reaction. It's kind of like in biology. There's this idea of the positive feedback loop, very similar to pregnancy. So, for example, let's say a female's pregnant, they're going into labor, and she's having the baby. The oxytocin is going, it's helping her push, and that's her body's kind of signaling because of these reactions going on in her body. It continues positive feedback where it's producing more oxytocin, and then eventually it just ends up in a culmination of having a labor or delivering the baby, and then that ends the cycle. In this case, what would end the cycle is once all the material has been reacted, or if there was like an explosion of some sort, then that's what would finalize the reaction in a sense. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we already discussed the part that it's a monomer. It polymerizes to form these resins or plastics, essentially. The issue is that it generates heat, which makes it go by faster. That's the whole idea of the runaway. The other part that's important as well is that this is contained within, in liquid form, the methyl methacrylate, and it's contained within tankers. Now you probably know this already, but vapor has much more volume than liquid. Liquid, we can contain it within, let's say, for example, a cup. If you have, if I were to boil it, so it's in vapor form or gas form, gaseous form, then it's going to exert pressure. If this was sealed, it's going to exert pressure on this container, and eventually there reaches a point that that pressure will exceed the capacity of this container and it will explode. So that's another risk factor, that as the gas is heating up, it's also increasing, it's boiling within the tanker, and then that's increasing the pressure on the tanker, and then that compromises the integrity of it because it's maybe only rated for X amount of pressure, and then that can potentially result into the explosion, and that's one thing that they're worried about. That's why the firefighters that were prompted about this situation, they said either two things are going to happen. Either it's going to, I think he said, blow up or catch on fire, one of those two. The blow up is as a result of that pressure building up on the tanker, and then the heat kind of like if there's any excess heat, then that can cause it to auto ignite, and so that's another risk. But anyways, going back into it, the feedback loop. So there are safeguards in a sense. Oh, we would hope there are safeguards. One of them is chemical inhibitors. I didn't check what those chemical inhibitors are. That would prevent the reaction. Maybe that's something that we can look at into in a little bit later. But essentially, it's preventing the polymerization from happening within the tank. The other reason why it's not reacting is probably needs higher temperatures in order to react. So they keep the tankers naturally cool, and also they have those chemical inhibitors so that you can have it as just monomers in that state, and then when you need it for your manufacturing process, all you do is you put it into a different environment that's probably hotter, you remove the chemical inhibitors, and then that allows the polymerization to occur. Here we're going to talk about the phase change in temperature. Yes, the liquid monomer vaporizes rapidly, so this is what we discussed about in boiling. And if the storage vessel, the container, doesn't have a way to release that gaseous form, or that the vapor, then as we said, the pressure increases. It's more likely to blow up. They describe it as a ticking time bomb. Yeah, because there's two primary threats: mechanical failure, and that's going to be by the tank losing its integrity and just kind of blowing up. Oh no, that's going to be this one here. And then mechanical failure is if it will rupture. Okay, so if there's a part of it that leaks, and then that starts to throw out the methyl methacrylate, and because it's in an open environment, and because it's hotter, it's not gonna have the chemical inhibitors really in the concentration that it needs to be there. It'll start to ignite. So there's really two things that can happen. You can get a fire, right, or you can get that explosion, or potentially both. So not an ideal scenario. So what are first responders doing? They're cooling the tanker, so that's one thing that you can see. They're blasting it with water perpetually, so that it will remain thermal controlled. Let's see. I don't know if they're adding more chemical inhibitors, so that's one thing I'm not too sure about. But let's go ahead and now transition over to, now that we have a high level understanding of what's happening, let's go to the risks. So the risks are, number one, if the tanker were to blow up, and if you're within the immediate site, then that can cause damage, like physical damage. The force that's going to be exerted on the housing structures. It's in a residential area, so the housing structures, the people, if there are any people there, so like the firefighters are at risk, and the medics and so forth. So that's one of them. Number two is that it is an irritant. So apparently it's banned from the FDA to be used for nail treatments, and nail treatment material can already be kind of caustic or corrosive, or can be a little bit damaging already. So it's not ideal if it's more irritating than that already. So one example I like to think of is acetone. If you get it on your skin, you can dry your skin up. So it's a little bit of an irritant, desiccant. Whereas in this case, since it's banned by the FDA because it's stronger than that, it's very likely that it's very, very damaging in terms of really drying up your skin, causing rashes and so forth. Um, the good news is that it's not carcinogenic, so that's good news. So that if it were to get out into the environment, you're not looking at increased cancer risks. So carcinogen just means cancer causing. So that's good news. The bad news is, and this is going back to it, it can cause that dermatitis, that dryness, that those rashes, and so this is going back to why it's banned for using in nail products, is because it could cause the permanent loss of the nail plate. So that's ideally we want to keep our nails and keep our skin and not have rashes. So that's why we wouldn't want it out in the environment. So the risks are the actual force of the explosion. Second one is going to be the if you were to get it on you, the desiccant properties of it, or and then the third is that it is a flammable substance, so it could, if you have enough of it, it could ignite, especially with higher temperatures in California. So that's definitely a risk. So it's not a good place to be, but that's also why they perform the evacuations. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the KTLA 5 news article. One thing I will say, that just as I was looking at this, I'm not a fan of the article, only because it looks very much like this website was infected by a virus. Look at just how many things. Click here to download. There's like some videos playing to the side. It's talking about like Frontier Internet, printable chair yoga program. So I do apologize for all this other advertisement. It just seems like a poorly written website. But with that said, let's take a look and read this. So this is that this has continued into Sunday, I believe. Well, we'll take a look at when it happened. So crews are continuing to monitor Garden Grove area amid the incident that prompted mass evacuations. Governor Newsom from California has called a state of emergency for it, and then there is a class action lawsuit happening as a result of this. It's saying it began at 3:30 p.m. on Thursday. They reported a leak at GKN Aerospace Transparency System. First responders were eventually able to determine or identify the substance as methyl methacrylate, a volatile and flammable liquid used to make acrylic plastics. So that's where the polymerization happens, or it forms the resins, which are those plastics. Evacuation orders for tens of thousands, so 50,000 people, were performed on Thursday. The orders were temporarily lifted Thursday night because crews made progress on the mitigation efforts, that cooling that they talked about bringing in icebergs. However, this situation continued to deteriorate on Friday morning. Orders were reissued. As it stands, roughly 50K people have been forced to leave their homes. GKN spokesperson released a statement surrounding the situation on a Saturday. So this is the whole PR statement that they're making, trying to minimize the situation. So the situation remains ongoing, and we're fully focused on working with emergency services, specialized hazardous material teams, and the relevant authorities to ensure the safety of the local community, our employees, and everyone else is involved. We sincerely apologize for the significant disruption to many of the local residents and businesses who have had to be evacuated. We are working tirelessly with all the relevant experts to resolve the situation as safely as possible in a timely manner, and are deeply grateful for the continued skill and dedication of the Orange County Emergency Services. So, I mean, it's great that they want to put a PR statement. Ideally, they would have been responsible about the safeguards originally in place, the engineering controls, administrative controls, to make sure that having thousands upon thousands of toxic material within a residential area was properly contained to begin with. But at least they're responding, I guess. But what we're going to talk about after this, just why this mentality, or how this mentality is kind of prevalent, at least from what I tend to see. So Friday came and went with the situation escalating. Officials announced. Orange County Fire Authority Division Chief Craig Covey explained at a press conference that crews had initially gotten a hand on things, but were not able to fully stabilize the overheating 34,000-gallon tank containing the volatile and highly flammable industrial chemical. We're doing our best to figure out when we can prevent a leak or explosion. There are there are literally two options left remaining. One, the tank fails and spills a total of 6 to 7K of bad chemicals into the parking lot, into that area. Not great because it's flammable, so that's not great if it were to spill. Or two, the tank goes into a thermal runaway and blows up. Yep. Neither of those situations are great. The good thing is they're quarantining the areas. On Saturday morning, Orange County officials told KTLA that they made progress overnight stabilizing the temperatures. So that's the cooling that they're doing with the water, and maybe other chemicals, but definitely water that they're blasting it with. Stabilizing the temperature of the massive storage down, but appeared to be in a holding pattern of sorts as they continue to work on a final solution. A critical incident briefing released by the OFCA Division Chief Covey on Saturday indicated the situation was still unfolding in a 5-minute video. He stated initial reports of the tanks being stabilized on Friday were disproven by the new, more exact measurements of the liquid itself that showed the temperatures of the tanks actually rose significantly. So here we are. But with that intel and working with chemists from the emergency response team from the manufacturer, we made the call last night to go back on the offensive. He said, noting that the crews have been put in a defensive posture throughout the ordeal due to the risk of the explosion. That elevating temperature, I believe I saw the interview, and it was that originally it was around, like, I think 77 degrees, and then over time it had been increasing about 1 degree per minute. So it's definitely increasing in temperature, which results in more of that activity happening within the tank, the polymerization, which generates more heat. And the problem is, if it does, I don't know what temperature that would be. I think I saw that chemists explain as well, they don't know exactly what temperature that would be, just because they would have to know the exact conditions, so the conditions within the tank, what's specified for, and so forth. But once it reaches, let's say, a certain threshold, then it could run away, which would result in more polymerization and that fire and explosion. So going on the explosion, we did put people in harm's way on Friday night with the attempt to neutralize the additional 15,000 pound tank to remove the product's explosive material should the 7,000 pound tank blow up. And that's one thing as well, that it's, I believe, one tank that's leaking. The only thing is that there's adjacent tanks as well that have hazardous materials that are at risk. And so I think maybe it sounds like what they're doing is they're trying to neutralize the adjacent tanks by maybe removing them, and then or moving them over to a new location so that they're not at risk. If this one tank were to blow up, at least the other materials wouldn't be affected. It looks like. Covey further elaborated on 2 possible outcomes of rupture and spill, or an explosion, and the plans for each. Let's see. Right now, one of the concepts we're thinking about is because of the heavy deluge of water and cooling it. So they're blasting it with water. We're allowing it to cure at a slower rate and reducing its overpressure. So cure is the just the term for generating, performing the polymerization, generating the resin. So they're allowing it to react at a slower rate and reducing its overpressure. He said, likening to an ice cube freezing from the outside in. An ice cube freezing from the outside in. Yeah, so they're just cooling it from the outside. I think that's what he's trying to say. While it's doing that process, it's building pressure. Yeah, so while it's doing that process, there's building a pressure. There's a void space above the top layer of the liquid between the top space. Okay, so there's an empty space between the top layer of the liquid. So let's imagine the liquid's here. And this is just speculation, but let's just imagine the liquid's at the brown line. And then there's an empty space here at the top of the actual container. So it's a void space, or just empty. Between the top layer of the liquid and top space. We're hoping that the space can absorb a slower cure rate and not overpressurize and blow up. Yeah. So the thing is, let's say imagine all of this to the bottom is filled with liquid, and then this brown part is the actual space that's available, like just empty space. Well, that space fills up with gas. As we said, the vapor forms, and that vapor exerts a pressure. So it's the same thing as if you have a balloon, right? If I pump it with more air, there's only so much space that can occupy within that. Well, maybe not a balloon is a great example. Let's say like a water bottle. If I were to put air into a water bottle, yes, it has some flexibility, but for the most part, it keeps its shape. So if I pump air, let's say I have an air pump and I start pumping air into that water bottle, it's going to slightly expand for the most part, but it's going to try to retain its shape, its integrity, and there's going to reach a point that because of the excess pressure, it'll blow up the water bottle. So that's what they're thinking. We're hoping that space can absorb a slower cure rate and not overpressurize and blow up. So they don't want the space that's available to not be able to contain that pressure, and then that's what would happen. We're optimistic and we're trying to get technology in there and validate our thoughts. We're bringing people in from all over the county, talking to people from all over the place to get additional options, which is great to always get engineers, scientists within there, just because they'll be able to come up with different solutions and different approaches. Letting this thing just fail and blow up is unacceptable. He further stated our goal is to find something and to not allow that to happen and damage our community and our environment. Yeah, that would be ideal. Yeah, you definitely want to try to find solutions rather than kind of just giving up and just letting the reaction run its course. Reason being is that there's going to be damage, right? There's going to be flammable material, there's going to be structural impacts to the surrounding area, or there's going to be fires to worry about. So ideally, if they can mitigate that, that would be ideal. The situation has elicited California officials to step in. Governor Newsom office declared a state of emergency early Saturday afternoon, allowing for mobilization of additional state resources. Also Saturday afternoon, the filing of a class action lawsuit against GKN Aerospace. The lawsuit filed by X-Law Group, so forth, on behalf of 2 residents living within the evacuation zone, alleges that they are responsible and other responsible parties had failed to adequately protect the surrounding community from a known hazardous condition. Yep, that's very clear. The suit seeks accountability for residents facing evacuation orders, property disruption, potential health risks, loss of use of their homes, related expenses, and diminished property values. Makes sense? So these are all consequences that are faced generally after a disaster. So whether it's like a tornado, hurricane, the wildfires that happened in California, there's value that's lost within that home. For example, after the fires in California, there's carcinogenic material within those homes, and that deeply decreased the property value. So some homes can't even live in them, or you have to have a significant cleanup, and even then there's still risk. So people are less inclined to want to live there, and the value just goes straight down. So these are all actual expenses that they've incurred. So as of Sunday morning, the possibility of an explosion still looms as officials scramble to find a solution for the dangerous situation. Footage taken overnight shows crews that entered the facility in order to obtain an accurate reading of the temperature of the volatile liquid inside the compromised storage tank, which, according to the OFCA Division Chief Kofi, rose significantly over the last day. Okay. And then here's some resources for the affected individuals, those who have been asked to vacate, which are 50,000 people. So they're available for tens of thousands who are forced to vacate or evacuate in the wake of the chemical incident. And then there's a full list. There's also a map showing the blast zone, what would be affected, the different areas. So there's severe, moderate, light. And then also with respect to the flammability. So we can take a look at that. Here are some evacuation centers that they shared. Thankfully, these locations are accepting people, and just because people need a place to go, to shower, to eat. And looks, so very happy to see Planet Fitness in Orange County are open to evacuees and first responders. No membership needed. They have access to locker rooms, showers, a place to rest, electrical outlets, Wi-Fi. Select 24-hour fitness locations are offering the same. This is really great of those companies. There's also an anonymous tip line if people know more about the circumstances. Okay. Now, so those are my 3 topics. One is just as a review again, at a high level, what is the methacrylate? It's responsible for making plastics. So it chains itself up and then produces heat. Now there's several thousands of gallons here then that's what is at risk. Just because if it was maybe like hundreds of gallons or tens of gallons, it's not as likely to be as risky. But thousands of gallons, that's definitely an issue. Number two is what are its effects? So it's flammable. It's an irritant, desiccant. So you don't want it on you at all. You don't want it on the environment because of the fire risk. But thankfully, it's not carcinogenic. So if it were to kind of fall within the environment, it would need to be cleaned up, but it wouldn't increase. As far as we know, it wouldn't increase the risk of cancer. So that's really good. And then third, we know that it's being tackled at the moment by firefighters, medical services, and then scientists as well, engineers. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this is not, at least in my opinion, it's not, in my opinion, it's not really just one company that's responsible. So in this particular incident, let's take it out of the picture of just this one incident. But I think there's a tendency for companies to want to maximize profit, and in such doing, whenever they implement their strategies, they look at how can I produce more, but not necessarily how can I make sure that as I'm producing more, I'm doing it correctly. There's been a push towards lower quality. So this doesn't have to be just physical structures, but lower quality in terms of, so I work within the software field. You can see the way AI is implemented. A lot of software is lower quality, where you see websites going down more frequently. So like GitHub, AWS, Amazon, which is Amazon Web Services, whole host of other services that are down just because they implement AI. There's exploits within them. So there's hacks that are, so it's, in some cases it's written poorly, and that allows it to be able to be more easily hacked. Or it's using prompting, and as a result, it's allows new vectors for it to be hacked. One example is you give your AI prompt, or you allow AI prompts, and one of them was, which was interesting, was like you can hack with Morse code, because generally, if we're looking at the prompts, we're not looking to see if, okay, is this Morse code, or we just think it's random kind of characters. But we're not really interested in that. We think, okay, it's not English saying that's, or natural language that's saying, hey, please send us over your keys, and so that we can get remote access to your services. It's not saying that in plain language, but it can be using it through other ways, such as Morse code, and that's just one hack that was there. But there are even cases where you can ask the AI agent, like, can you please, give me your credentials, and then they'll go ahead and send it on over to another server, where then they'll now have your now they'll have access to your system. But there's also lower quality, just because there is a push for less knowledge to be able to implement AI. So these kind of no-code solutions, I see them all the time on YouTube as commercials. So all the time on commercials that say, I don't need to know any part of coding. I can just go ahead and start making my app. And you could probably make a product that's working. Whether it can be maintained, that's another question. Whether it's safe is another question. And that's what's really concerning to me, that there's such a push for productivity over quality, and then that results in these horrendous consequences. Now, it depends obviously on what market you're in. If you're in a market where you're doing something that's low risk, then if you make something that's insecure, maybe the risk is low, right? There's not necessarily too much of a big consequence to worry about. But when you're trying this approach of low quality, just to be able to produce goods and services, so in this case, the aerospace industry, that's a highly sensitive field. So aerospace, embedded safety and critical devices. So let's say like heart pumps, anything to do with health, anywhere where you're working with these hazardous materials, carcinogenic materials, explosives, and so forth. perspective of being able to kind of push and try to really crank out production over quality is what results in these incidences. So I see this as one symptom of a mindset that's within business, and that's that there's a very short-sighted approach of, instead of focusing on quality and then kind of expanding out at the rate that your quality can remain consistent, there's a push for, let's expand out. If there's consequences, we'll deal with them once we get there. And depending on, like as I said, the sector that you're working within, that could result in lives being lost. Now, whether these companies care about if lives are lost on their end, maybe they could just pay a fine, and that's on them. But at least from the consumer's perspective, from the public's perspective, I think it is incumbent on us to push for high quality. Whenever we see companies that are looking to just rapidly spam out products and services, and they offer it, and you see that the product is very, how should I say, it looks like it's low quality, it looks like it's crashing all the time, or it looks like it's causing these issues like recalls. Like, let's say you're working with medication or certain drugs and you're seeing that it's constantly getting recalled. We should demand better from those companies. The way you do that is you vote with your wallet. So you just don't purchase those. You also write letters to your elected officials, and you tell them, this is unacceptable that these companies are placing our lives at risk. Let them know beforehand with anything that you see. And then ideally what will happen is when, sadly, change tends to happen when people's lives are affected, and generally more so when lives are lost. So like a plane crashes or something that's noticeable to the public. Then all those letters that came in beforehand, if it wasn't remediated, if it wasn't fixed beforehand, then that's just additional ammo to really bring about an even bigger lawsuit and say, these were all known issues, these were all things that people had complained about, and rather than addressing it early on, they let it get to this problem. Ideally, and then that'll start the push for companies to fix things earlier than to wait for the damage to happen and then try to brush it off. So that's my aim for this video, just to kind of talk about a little bit about this incident within Garden Grove, because it's affecting a lot of people. A lot of people are displaced at the moment. But number two, at a larger scale, to talk about why I believe this is happening. That mindset of favoring increased production for profits over quality. That's, I think, what I believe is causing these incidents to happen. Because why else would there not be administrative controls, engineering controls that would have prevented this, right? Why are there not checks that are happening, preventative maintenance that's happening on these tankers? Probably because it costs money, and the short-sighted approach is we'll get to it later, or we'll do the minimum that's maybe legally required, but without actually having the full confidence that it was secured. So we can do our part by sending out messages to our officials, or just making it known that this is something that I think will lead to some downstream problem. And that's one thing that you can do. And number two is you can vote with your wallet, which is, if you see a product like this, or if you see a company like this, choose not to financially support them. Look at an alternative to say that, I want a high quality product. I don't want to settle for this that can put my data, my life, my livelihood at risk. So with that said, thank you so much everyone for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.